A lot of times we want to go straight to the temple. Let's build our body. Let's eat better. Let's do these things. But we are surrounded by rubble from the past.
Hey friend, welcome to the Diet Haters Podcast. I'm your host, Sunday Joe, loser of 145 pounds, who's passionate about helping you learn how to stop dieting, find lasting weight loss results, and learn your true identity in Christ. So today is a day of celebrations as we are wrapping up our second season of the Diet Haters Podcast. We are 24 episodes in as of today, and all I can say seriously, it's just wow. Like, I'm so grateful to be doing this podcast with you, and I'm so grateful that you and I have been on this journey together for 24 episodes. So cool. I am cueing the confetti right now. And I'm telling you what, the enemy has fought hard to keep this podcast from happening, which tells me that it must be making a difference. So if you're good with it, I'm going to keep pushing through to victory and shoot for season 3 unless Jesus comes back to get us before then. So I'm in if you're in. And I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up season 3 than doing an interview with one of the coolest people out there, my friend Jill. So Jill has written a memoir full of powerful, just raw, gritty truth, and it is going to rock your world. I am truly inspired by her bravery to tell her story so that others can find healing. The book is called Secrets of the Little Green-Eyed Girl, Digging Up the Roots of Shame and Guilt. And really, it's a book of hope, a book about learning to walk daily in the freedom of being forgiven and being clean. And I don't mean clean as in sober clean. I mean clean as in pure clean, the way God designed us to be. One of the reasons that I wanted to have Jill on to talk about the book is because so much of our struggles with weight loss is tied to shame. I mean, for many of us anyway, myself included. Of course, I can't say everybody, but I would bet to say a lot. You know, I've met so many women who've spent years of their lives eating their shame away. And again, myself included in that. But God did not design us to live our lives this way. And in the book, Jill shares her powerful story of God's forgiveness. And she shares a part of her journey of secrets that she feared would destroy her. And she's pulling back the covers to show what kept her bound and tied to the darkness of shame, as well as sharing the victories and hopes to inspire you to keep pushing forward. And I'm telling you what, talking about the enemy not wanting this podcast to happen, the enemy did not want this episode to happen. We had more technical difficulties than I even care to talk about. So give us some grace in this interview if there are parts that just don't sound the greatest. We really fought hard to get this interview going. And at the end, the enemy lost. So again, give us some grace in this, okay, as we approach this interview. But I'm excited, so without further ado, let's dive into our interview with my friend Jill. All right, Jill, thanks for being on the show today. I've been excited to do this interview, excited to have you on here to tell a little bit about your story and about this amazing book that you've written. Before we get started, though, I would love for you to just tell us more about who you are and what you're doing and what the Lord is up to in your life.
Well, I'd love to do that. So I am a wife, a mother of 3 adult children, and I have 5 grandchildren. That is the best part of my story. So I could spend a whole segment talking about the grandkids. But that's who I am, day to day. And currently I am in a season of life that I'm able to stay home and really work on ministry. And I've started a biblical counseling certification that I should have completed in the next year and a half, that I'm really excited about. Just being able to speak truth into, and when I say truth, I mean God's truth, into the heart of hurting people. And so I'm really excited about this endeavor. So that's kind of what my day-to-day looks like these days. And I'm super excited about having the time and availability to really pour into that. So I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. I like I like how you said we have seasons. We definitely all have different seasons for sure.
Absolutely.
So you wrote a book about a little green-eyed girl, and that's what I want to talk about today because I think it's a powerful story, and I'm so excited for us to just learn more about it. And man, I finished it. I know it's a quick book, but it was a powerful book, and I was just underlining lots of things when I was reading it. So tell us a little bit about the book, why you decided to write it.
Well, I am not a writer. I have never aspired to write a book, but over 20 years ago, actually before a time of healing came and a time of healing from guilt and shame, the Lord had just really put on my heart, or told me, however you want to call it, that I would write a book one day. And so the fact that that came before my healing amazes me because I had no idea at that point what it would be about. And so it's been I've been walking in freedom for 21 years now. And I'm also an avid journaler. And so for over 25 years, I have journaled my prayers. And during a dark, dark season, which I talk about in the book, I journaled through that as well. And at some point, I went back and looked through those. It took quite a while to even open those back up to that particular time frame in my life. But I eventually did that and was amazed at where I saw God working in that time. And so I started to do a little bit of writing around my healing, around the topic, and nothing ever really came of it. I didn't feel like it would go anywhere. And I think if you recall during that time, I think it was 2014 or 15, you were writing, I think, your first book. And we had a phone call, and I was picking your brain on how do you do this? How do you organize your thoughts? And you were so gracious to spend that time with me to do that. But nothing ever came of it. I just had to label it a project and kind of move on. And of course, the enemy is right there. When you're even stepping forward in obedience, the enemy is right there to tell you, well, you failed. You can't even get a book off the ground. So I struggled with not being able to move forward because it just wasn't there, and then battling the enemy. And so a couple years went by, and I would sit down and have other avenues of thought around the topic. And this kept happening. There was nothing there, not enough there. I thought I could make a really nice pamphlet to hand out, but it was nowhere near a book. And, finally, the Lord showed me after probably 3 attempts at putting things together that He told me everything I had done was part of a whole. And so that gave me peace, knowing I'd been writing the book for several years. That first project that could have been a pamphlet, that was part of the book. And so last year, I had the opportunity to work with a writing coach because, I'd prayed. I told you I wasn't a writer at the onset. I'm not being humble in that. I've never enjoyed necessarily writing. I'm not gifted at it. My husband is very gifted at writing, and I'm not a reader. And so that admission in itself, I don't read many books. Not that I can't read. It's just not one of my pleasures to read just many books. So I'm at a disadvantage of, gathering resources from other people. So I prayed for God to help me. It's like, if you want me to write this book, you're going to have to help me. So He did actually send me back to college a couple years ago, and I had to take a writing class, a composition class that I hadn't taken in 20 years. But you know what? Through writing those papers and doing those things and really getting that, I was just fearful of what I would put down on paper, that it wouldn't sound good. So that was a project, but He led me to a writing coach that really helped keep me accountable to get the process going, but then keep it going. It's one thing to start, but at this point it was time. And so that's kind of where it evolved. It had been something that I'd known I was supposed to do for a long time, but the message came to fruition last summer. So I started last June, and the book launched this past June, 2022,
Mm-hmm.
June 1st. So that's kind of where it developed.
Yeah. And, you have a powerful story to share. So why would the enemy not try to keep you from doing that? I mean, that's how he works, because he's a jerk face. I say all the time, when we know who we are in Christ, our decisions reflect that. When we don't know who we are in Christ, our decisions reflect that. And you said something in the book. You said, healing begins by recognizing where you are, knowing who has a stake in the fight for your freedom. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, the thing I realized when I was going through this all stemmed back from my childhood, but at that time I was not a believer. I was a churchgoer at a very young age, but I wasn't a believer. I didn't understand. And so I didn't anymore understand God's role in my life. I had no knowledge of who the enemy was. And so when I say that, for healing to happen, I had to understand that once I became a believer and went through my healing, that actually did happen, that God was always there, but the enemy was there as well. I kept hearing or believing lies. Now I see them as lies. Before, I just thought it was what I felt about myself and how I believed, who I thought I was. So I didn't think anybody or an entity or Satan was lying to me, because I didn't know Satan existed, really. I just thought, wow, I'm worthless based on some choices, and I'm, insignificant, all these things. And once Jesus got a hold of me, and as you said, we understand who we are in Christ, I understood that the things that I was thinking about myself and the labels that I wore had nothing to do with who God said I was. And so there had to be a disconnect, and I understood, okay, the enemy's been feeding me these lies, and I needed to recognize it. So that's just probably the how I would expand on that particular thing, because I think a lot of times we don't understand where our thought life actually comes from, because it's pretty much easy to believe if we feel that way about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an identity issue, and specifically just talking about food addiction, period. It all goes back to an identity issue, because we don't know who we are in Christ. We don't know how much He loves us, and if we do know, we don't necessarily believe it. So our actions, follow that.
Right.
This is something that we teach in the Diet Haters University membership about replacing lies with liberating truths, because behind every fear is a lie. Behind every lie is God's truth, right? And you say one of His greatest tactics is speaking lies in your head that sound like your own voice. If those voices had sounded demonic or evil, the source could have been recognized. But hearing the whispers, "You are worthless and evil in my spirit," the lies were easy to believe wholeheartedly. It was easy to believe, since that was how I saw myself. I think so many of us can relate to that.
Yeah, that was probably another one of those moments of understanding who the enemy was and what he'd been doing. It is easy to believe the lies that he feeds you if you're feeling those ways yourself. I talked a little bit about God's truth, and what the enemy tries to counterfeit that. And I talked a little bit about that, how you spot, how bankers would spot a counterfeit bill. They don't take time to look at every variation that someone could counterfeit or make a bill look close enough. They study the real thing intently, and then when something comes across that is a variant, a red flag goes up. Well, that's the same thing with the enemy's lies and God's truth. We can sit around and waste a lot of energy thinking, oh, is this how he could lie to me? Is it, looking at the ways the enemy could attack, as opposed to looking intently into God's word, the never changing truth. And when we do that, and we spend all the energy doing that, when a lie comes through and it doesn't line up, that red flag just goes up immediately. Or, at first it's a practice. You have to practice, as Paul said, taking those thoughts captive. It takes time, but you will start to recognize the enemy's voice. It stops sounding like your own, and you can pick him out pretty easily at that point. But it does take effort daily to be in the truth.
Yes, and I think you're right. It is. It's about practice. Because we didn't become overweight overnight, right? And so we're not just gonna automatically become healthy and everything is perfect overnight. It's about taking those little next right steps, and a huge part of that is spiritual and knowing our identities. And like you said, studying that counterfeit bill, knowing when. Knowing the difference between the lie from the enemy and what is really our own voices. And once we keep doing that over and over and over again, we can recognize, no, I don't think that's me. I would never call myself worthless, right? God would never call me worthless. And so it's that practice, just like anything. It's building that habit of renewing our mind. Hey friend, just wanted to interrupt this interview real quick to remind you of something, that you are valuable, that you are worth fighting for, that you don't have to allow your past to control you any longer, and to remind you that you don't have to keep walking in the never-ending cycle of dieting. Sometimes all it takes to get back on track in our health journey is literally going back to the basics, back to simple next right steps that lead us to the best version of ourselves, the version God designed us to be. If I can lose 145 pounds, you too can lose weight, my friend. Doesn't matter if it's 10, 20, 50, 100 or more. If I can do it, you can too. I've created a free guide just for you called 4 Simple Steps to Weight Loss to help you on your weight loss journey. And in this free guide, you're going to learn 4 simple steps that will get you started on your journey without giving in to the diet mentality. Now, here's what I won't promise will happen. I won't promise you'll lose 30 pounds in 30 days. I won't tell you if that you take a magic pill, you're going to burn the fat in your sleep. I won't tell you that you'll lose all the weight you need to lose if I mix up a magic formula for you to drink 3 times a day, okay? Here's what I will promise will happen. If you follow these 4 simple steps, you will see results. Following these steps won't always be easy, but they are simple. I am rooting for you, my friend, and if you are ready to take control of your health today and say goodbye to dieting once and for all, you can download my free guide, 4 Simple Steps to Weight Loss, today at sundayjoe.com/4steps. That's sundayjoe.com/4steps. And don't worry, if you're driving or cutting grapes to add to the chicken salad and can't write the link down, I will share it in the show notes for you, all right? And now, back to the show. So one of the things that we talk about a lot around here is overcoming shame. And I think it's so easy for us to eat through our feelings, eat through our shame, and not really deal with it a whole lot. And that's a big premise of what your book is overcoming shame. So I would love if you could just share with us how you dealt with that, overcame that, whatever else you want to share about that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I will just go kind of start from, kind of where it all happened for me, without going back to the day I was born. But it did start when I was very, very young, and that's very important. When I was young, my family we went to church, but I did not really believe in the Lord. I kind of had Jesus on the same radius as the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. And so once I kind of understood those weren't real, Jesus just kind of went out with them. And so I never really invested my heart. And so that really left the enemy with grounds to really lie to me at a certain point in my life. And that was when I was probably 8 to 10 years old. I found pornography, and, my dad brought it into the house, but back in those days, in the 70s, it came in, brown paper wrapped very discreetly in the mailbox. It was not put on the coffee table. He actually hid that. He had no desire for his kids to find it. And so he hid it away very well. But I, being a very curious child, found it. And I would love to say that my testimony is that once I saw it, I screamed and ran away. But that's just not my story. I kept going back. And so that in itself heaped guilt and shame, that I wanted to be the good girl my parents thought I was, but I had this secret. I just kept going back. And, part of the writing of this book. Now, I found pornography. It led me down a path to do some really, in my mind, dark things. And then Jesus healed me. That's the message of this of my book. And I love to talk about the then Jesus. But
Absolutely.
what I have never really talked about was the effects of the pornography. I usually talk about pornography, what it led me to do. Then we talk about Jesus a lot because, again, that's the best part of my story.
Right.
But when I was writing this book last year, and I started, just touching on the pornography, I was ready to move on, and God said, "I need you to sit on this a little bit longer. I need you to sit here." And, I never really had. Here's a question I had never asked myself. I wonder what the effects were on my little brain to see that pornography. I had done a little bit of research on trauma, helping my husband get over some things of his childhood. Back in the day, they used to think kids are resilient. They'll get over these things. But the fact is, they're not. And
that's not true.
Our little brains are not prepared to process abuse or things we see that we don't understand, like pornography. And so what I came to understand, and again, I was 53 years old when I first asked the question, I wonder what the effects were on my little brain. And so I did some research and really came to understand that the first time I saw that, it was like getting a hit of cocaine. And, the dopamine levels just shot up. And so that drug is so addictive, and it really explained why I didn't just scream and run away. I was drawn back over and over. And, one of the things about pornography, it's a gateway drug. It leads to many other things. Absolutely. As drugs themselves, you start with marijuana, it's a gateway drug to other things. Well, pornography leads to other things. And at one point, I think I feared that I'd be found out if I were going down to look at that closet. And I stopped going. I really wanted my parents to think, they thought I was a pretty good girl. I wanted them to believe that. I didn't want to get caught. So I stopped doing that. But then that kind of left a void, in my expression of, seeing pornography. And then obviously as a young girl, masturbating with that, because those seemed to go hand in hand. So I really didn't have an outlet for that. HBO finally came on the scene, but, and back then my parents didn't even think that a filter was needed. They didn't know I was going to go look for things. But the problem with that was TVs in these days were, very large and in the center of your living room. So, finding time to surf that when no one else was around, that wasn't an option either. And so, to my need for expression poured out when a little neighbor boy, he was a year older than I was, lived pretty close to our family. We started playing house. I was probably 10 years old. And it's really interesting when two kids get together that have more information and knowledge than they should, how far that can go. And that, and then at one point, I met a little girl at Girl Scout camp, and, again, how do two people who have more knowledge than they should, meet each other? And so, these areas of expression, I finally grew out of that, thinking this is not right. This is not right. And so in the book, I call it just a moment of complete weakness. A little girl younger than I was, I touched her inappropriately, and immediately I hated myself. I knew that was so wrong, and I literally hated myself. And that's where the enemy was right there to just reinforce, you are pure evil. You are despicable. And if you can tell yourself, okay, wait, that didn't happen. That did not happen. That did not happen. What I did is I took that event and I buried it. That could not have happened. And I don't know if you're like me, though, you can bury things, but they don't stay hidden. They don't stay buried. They come up. The enemy brings them back up. and just really
Absolutely.
torment you. And so I think going into my teenage years, I really needed to change the narrative in my head. I couldn't believe what I had done when I was younger. And I think I became very promiscuous as a teenager. And I think I was trying to change the narrative in my head. I mean, I'd rather be thought of as this type of person than that type of person. And it's kind of amazing how we'll just change one bad label for another. But this one seemed less
Right.
bad, I think, in my mind. So, fast forward, I'm still not a believer at this time, still going to church, but not a believer. Meet my husband, in God's perfect grace. Even before I knew him, he brought me a man who would love me, not really knowing who I was, because of course I couldn't share this. I was never going to share this with anybody. And then when being a wife, and we had 2 kids right away, and being a wife and a mother didn't fill that dark void in my heart, I finally realized at 26 that only Jesus was gonna fill that hole that I had. And so that's basically when I unearthed my box and I laid it at the cross and begged him to forgive me because it needed forgiveness. And he did. But what I did then was I took that box that was forgiven, but I buried it again because I couldn't forgive myself. When you come to the cross, God redeems you and he wants you fully restored. And I came to the cross, certainly, and was forgiven, but I did not allow him to restore me because I could not set down my bags of shame and guilt. I could never share this with anyone else. And so I was hoping God and I would make this transaction of, okay, you've forgiven it. Can we just move on? I love you. And so I just started reading the word. I absorbed everything, went to ladies' Bible studies. I just wanted to fall in love with the Lord, which I did. And every once in a while, he would, in the softest voice, just say, Jill, we need to deal with that box you buried. And the first time it caught me so off guard because I'm like, Lord, you know that I cannot share that with another living soul. I mean, nobody. And so I would say no. And God being a very patient God, he let it go. He dropped it. And still, I was having great fellowship with him, falling more in love with him, learning more about him. And again, he would come back and say, we need to deal with that box you buried. And if you can stomp your foot and say no to God, I think I tried that because there was just no way I was going to be able to share that. All he wanted was for me to be obedient and get help because he saw who he intended me to be. He saw the message that I would share on the other side of healing. And so that brings us to the summer of 2001, where he fell completely silent in my life. And I went into a dark, dark depression. And I call that summer of 2001 the worst, best summer of my life because I look back and I see how much God loved me. He loved me so much that he would make me absolutely miserable. And I wasn't sure I was going to survive that summer. It was a long, long, dark summer. Because that's when I finally had to understand how many years I'd been listening to the lies of the enemy and how deeply penetrating those lies had gone. I had prayed for years and years that I could hear someone give a testimony similar to mine so I wouldn't feel all alone. And I never heard one. And I'm convinced that God didn't let me hear another testimony because he knew on the other side of healing that I'd be willing to share mine. And, so through that summer, I did finally relent and I got help. I went to see my pastor's wife. And that's the first time I unearthed the words, I saw pornography as a child. And so at the end of that summer, she helped me walk through that. At the end of the summer, I was able to tell my husband these things. And really what happened, that the healing that came, I'll never forget the words he told me. He said, Jill, you were just a child yourself. And I was 36 at the time that I went through my healing. And you know what? I still felt like that 8-year-old girl inside. It's hard to separate yourself from who you were. But I really, at that moment, his words were so healing to me. I looked back at that little girl And I realized I had just been beating her up her whole life. I had never forgiven her and never let her be sorry and get over that. And so those were healing words. And that was a moment of victory, because really what happened was what I had kept in the darkness for so long, I finally allowed God's light to just shine on that. And, really from that moment is when I started sharing, very slowly at first, but sharing my story, sharing the hope that I had in Jesus. And so that, I've said that's been over 20 years ago that I was healed, and I've been walking in that freedom for 20 years. But you know what? You don't get healed and then you're good, because the enemy
Right.
doesn't go away. He'll retreat for a time, but he does it to re-strategize and then re-enter the fight. And
Yeah, because
then
he knows us better than we do.
oh, absolutely. He's got to change his tactic, because again, I had brought into the light what he was hoping that I would keep buried. And so that's the thing about the truth, and discerning those lies, is you have to understand that's his tactic. If he can get you to believe a lie or feel a certain way, wake up feeling less than, a child of God, then he can ruin that day. He can take my healing back, but he can certainly make me ineffective for that day. So like I say, it's been a daily fight to defend this freedom. I don't have to fight for my freedom every day, because the freedom is mine, but I do have to defend it from an enemy that is just despicable. So that's kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
where we are with finally overcoming that shame and getting out of that prison that I had held myself in, where I held the key. It wasn't anybody else but me keeping me in that prison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You said something. You said God just wanted you to be obedient and get help. And I think that's so powerful, because that's the same for all of us, regardless of our past, regardless of our story. He just wants us to get help, so that we can be free, so that we can experience, the life that he has designed us for. And you and we have a lot of similar stories, just as, especially with pornography. And I think there's this shame that already comes with it, but then there's this shame that is added to it as females dealing with it. And I don't think is as much anymore as it used to be. But, I love how you talked about starting to tell your story, because as I've started to open up about that, I've had more and more women come out and say, oh my gosh, I thought maybe I was the only one. And so I think you're right in that, continuing to tell your story, it's going to draw people out and say, wow, I thought I was the only one. So one of the things you said in the book is that we have the power to control the messaging that comes in as thoughts and then goes into our hearts. The mind is the gatekeeper. Careful attention to the mind messages will assure successful walking in victory as we live our life in freedom. And I know we've already talked about lies and kind of how to overcome that and how to handle that, but I just thought that was a powerful message, because as you've said, it's a process, that we have to keep doing. And if we can keep those thoughts, keep that shame, keep those lies from embedding themselves, into our hearts, I think the greater chance that we have of not following through with decisions that are going to hurt us, no matter what that is, whether that's reaching for food because we want to emotionally eat, or going and having a one night stand, or looking at pornography, or you name it. So I think that was just a really powerful message that you shared.
Well, and that was pivotal. When I came to the point of writing the book, telling my story up to the point that I just shared a minute ago, that was okay. That wasn't a problem. But when I got to the point of, okay, Lord, how do I tell them or help them by showing them how to walk in freedom every day? I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years. How did we do it? I didn't follow a game plan. I didn't have a book that held me through. And I'm like, Lord, we've done it. We're doing it. How do I help them? And so that was pretty pivotal. I had to go back again to my prayer journals and just kind of see what happened. And when I realized what I had done was I yielded my entire body, but first I yielded my mind. And it started with the believing who God says I am. And, everything we think does direct how we act. what we do, our addictive natures. And so that was pivotal to me to understand what I think has to change first, and who I believe has to change first, or the heart won't follow on its own, because we have too many feelings. We don't know how to process those.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if we don't get to the root of the issue, if we don't deal with the heart, we'll never truly get free. That's just all there is to it. We can do as many diets as we want. We can add as many things to our checklist as we want, but until we get to the root of the issue and deal with our hearts, we'll never truly be free. And again, that's always a process. It's never just a one-time thing. The Lord is constantly working on me. I don't know about you, but he's constantly working on me.
Well, I think what we want to do is tackle the problem at hand. And with food, the problem is where it's so different than, say, alcohol, drugs, or even pornography. We are to turn away from that 180 degrees away from it and never address it again. Food, however, we have to eat, but we have to do it in a way that's honoring to God. So it'd be one thing if we could just say, okay, I'm done with food. But that's not what it is. Right. And so a lot of times, and since food and the overeating of food in a unhealthy way leaves us overweight, leaves us, you can be thin and very, very unhealthy. So it really doesn't have to do with what that number is on the scale. It's how you feel inside. Because a 120-pound person can see a 175-pound person when she looks in the mirror. I don't even understand how that works, but it's a thing. But so we try to tackle that first when we've got so much going on the inside. And, it reminds me in Nehemiah where, he was going back to Jerusalem because he had heard that, they were rebuilding the temple, but the wall of security was broken down. And so he went and he kind of surveyed just the wreckage and the rubble of that wall. And a lot of times we want to go straight to the temple. Let's build our body. Let's eat better. Let's do these things. But we are surrounded by rubble from the past. And therefore we have no wall of security against the enemy. And so we've got to step back and look more at the root of why food has become what it is, why pornography has become what it is in my life, or alcohol or drugs or anything. But you know what? We don't like to go there. But I will tell you that I think my biggest message is freedom is worth it all. The one thing, talking about lies, I had such fear of telling anybody what had happened. But the greatest lie I believed was God was not greater than my greatest fear. And that was the biggest lie of all. I was afraid if I did tell my husband that God wouldn't be there to take care of me. But here's the thing. I finally got to the point where I said, Lord, if it all falls away, if I tell him and he leaves, you're enough. But you have to get there. And so, we have to, but I'm at a point in my relationship with food where it has nothing to do with food. Food is not sin. Nothing sinful about food. But how I interact with it and use it has been sin. I finally looked at that, that it has just been sin. I've tried to call it anything else. What I haven't done was repented. That means I've been very sorry, asked the Lord to forgive me. But I think I'm just sorry that I gained weight. I have not been repentant for not relying on God's power to overcome this. Interestingly enough, like I said, I've been walking free for 20 years, but now we're finally getting to the point. This is the one victory I have yet to have, and that's over my eating. But God is really zeroing in on me, and it's been an interesting journey for sure, because I'm asking him to empower me. I'm repentant, and I'm looking for him to empower me to do this.
It's interesting when you start a podcast. called Diet Haters and create a membership to help people walk in freedom, just how much like the Lord's like, okay, well, now I'm holding you at a higher standard, so we're going to pay attention to some things. It's crazy when you got to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
As we close out today, one of the things you said in the book is, my greatest desire for this book is to offer hope. Hope that surrounds you no matter your story, no matter how you feel about yourself. When you are all alone with your thoughts, you can find the redemption, restoration, and freedom offered through Jesus Christ. I think that's just such a powerful statement as we come to an end today. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Well, I just encourage you, if you've got that thing that you've been holding on to, if you bring that all to the Lord to let him restore you. That's the abundant life that he talks about. We're called to live abundantly here on this side of heaven. And so, the only hope we have to walk in this freedom is Jesus.
Anything else that you would like to add as we close out today?
With the amount of technical trouble we've had, I know the enemy did not want this to happen. And so
Yes.
I'm grateful that we got this completed. I know that the Lord has pieced together what was supposed to happen, because the enemy, he's defeated every time we set out to honor the Lord. And so we won't get discouraged and defeated.
Oh man, I told you it was going to be a powerful episode, my friend. I could have stayed and talked with Jill forever, seriously. I'm so glad that we made it through, because like I said, boy, did we have some difficulties. She has a powerful story, no doubt, and we didn't even begin to scratch the surface of what she covers in her new book, Secrets of the Little Green-Eyed Girl. I'm going to share the link to the book in the show notes in case you're driving or preparing for a bodybuilding contest. And before we close out today's episode, I do have a quick favor to ask. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind sharing with your friends and leaving a review? Perhaps you have a friend who needs help overcoming shame. This is the perfect episode for that. The more you share, the more opportunities for freedom and health. And the more reviews we get, preferably 5-star, the easier it is for others to find this podcast. So thank you in advance if you've done so already. And if you're looking for some extra encouragement, or maybe tired of being on your weight loss journey by yourself, I want to invite you to my free Diet Haters Facebook community, where we're doing life together. We're encouraging one another, sharing inspiration, praying with each other, laughing along the way. Of course, there's going to be shenanigans wherever I'm involved, right? I will share the link in the show notes for that, or you can head on over and just search Diet Haters on Facebook and you will find us there. All right, that is it for me today, my friend, and that is a wrap for season 2 of the Diet Haters podcast. We've got some exciting things in store for season 3, so make sure you stay tuned, and I will see you in the next episode of the Diet Haters podcast. And don't forget, you are valuable.